Okay, so here is a white-tailed deer. You can tell by the a little bit of wear and tear and weather. This looks like it was a deadhead that was found. I'm not sure if it was found after it had been attempted to be harvested or not, but it's just laying around here. I think this represents, probably most people's lifetime achievement buck. This is a very, very good deer. Um, I mean, just beautiful, sort of has everything. This deer's probably going to score somewhere around the 120s, and I'll show you how to score a deer real quick. There are several different ways to do it. Most of those have to do with deductions, not necessarily with how to measure, right? So I'll show you how to do some basic measurements. You add up all these scores, and that gives you the gross score of a deer, whitetail deer. So typically you would want to use something maybe a little better than just a regular measuring tape, but this will put you very close to the ballpark estimate of what it is. Now, if you wanted to get down to the eighth of an inch and do it properly, you usually get a couple extra inches somewhere. Typically, if you get like a wire or a piece of string or something to use, a lot of people use like a wire, and then you measure the wire. So you'd lay the wire along the antlers and then measure the wire. So real quick, what you're going to do is you're going to score the main beam all the way down to the burr here. You're going to score each point, and the length is going to be essentially where it goes into as it lays along the beam, right? So I'll take a quick measurement there, a quick eyeball in here, but where basically it comes in, and then I'll mark that and then measure that itself. If I wanted to get real particular, I could use a piece of tape. I could mark it with a piece like a pencil on the horn, exactly where it lays into the main beam, and measure it from there. And then, as I said, you would use, a piece of wire if you were going to get real picky about it. But this is just a general knowledge of how you would go about doing it. And I think this represents here a great buck that most people would want to try and score to get an idea of what it is, because in most cases, this is probably a 3 or 4 year old deer, and he'll probably outperform most 3 or 4 year old deer because he just has a lot of everything. So he's got decent mass, good length, etc. So what you want to do is you want to go ahead and go on both sides. So you're going to get each beam, and so I'll just take the measurement there, and you come along the beam best you can, follow the beam, and you go all the way to the burr, and this is about 20 inches for his main beam. And so I would annotate that left main beam 20 inches, and you would go through, and as I said, you'd kind of mark where that point intersects with the beam. I would mark that. I've already done so earlier, and then I'll measure that, right? And so he's right about 8 inches on his G3. Then you'll do the same for this. Again, you'll just kind of see where it lays into the beam. You'll mark that, and around 7 inches. With the brow tines, you can either go from the front or from the back. Either way, whichever way makes more sense. He's got about 5-inch, 5.5-inch brow tines. Beautiful brow tines. And then, so that's going to be 20 inches main beam, 8 inches G3, 7-inch G2, and 5-inch G1 or brow tine, as we call it. Right? So I would go ahead and get the score on this side as well. So I'd score this main beam, these, and all these points. Right? So that's essentially your point measurements. Then you're going to come in and find the widest point on the inside. And usually this does a lot better, especially with the wire or so forth. But he is almost 15 inches. So he's not a super wide deer, but because he's got everything else going on, if you think about it, if this was a 17, 18-inch wide deer, that would be great, but it's only going to give you 3 more inches. So the spread counts a lot, but tines count more, beams count a lot, right? So he's got about a almost 15-inch spread. And then, so that covers your points, your spread, and your beams. So now you're going to get the next 4 measurements. This is where most people have trouble scoring. One, they don't know how to or they didn't know about how to get the intersection, so you don't score all the way down to the bottom. You actually score where it lays. But the other thing is that you get 4 mass measurements per side. So he gets one here, and it's supposed to be the smallest circumference in between the burr and the fork, and then again the smallest circumference between the next fork. So you get here, that's 2. You get 1 here, 3. If you're a 10 point, you'd be here, but on an 8 point, you're going to have to measure this. So I would take a measurement here and say, okay, this is roughly 9 inches, so somewhere around 4.5 inches. You go about halfway, and you take a measurement there for the circumference, right? So I get the circumference here, almost 2 3/4, 3.5, 3 3/4, and he's got a really pretty good deal here where he's almost 5 inches at the base. So really good deer. I think his total score I wrote down is somewhere around 122. So that's a 120-inch deer right there. And like I said, for most people, especially down here where we're at right now in the Gulf Coast, this deer would be a buck of a lifetime in many cases. You may see some different configurations, but for the most part, a 120-inch deer sort of has everything. He has good time length, good beams, decent mass, and just sort of kind of has a little bit of everything. And that's how you get a really good mature buck. Most of the deer, heck, I've shot 5-year-old deer here that don't score this, right? So it's just luck of the draw on the genetic side, but this is a really, really good specimen of a deer, 120-inch deer. Basically, how you score deer, like I said, the big thing that messes people up is just the 4 circumference measurements, especially being able to get it exactly halfway on an 8 point. If it's a 10 point, you get in between to the next fork, right? So, but that's usually the big thing that throws people off is the 4 circumference measurements per side. Everything else, or just being able to calculate where exactly that line is. Now, if you get into like the Boone and Crockett Popic gun scoring system, they have deductions. Buckmasters, I don't believe, it has no deductions. So there's different ways to score per se, like what your final tally may be. However, in general, everybody agrees on like how to take the measurement. So there you go. Also, a good tip is if you go and look at SCI or Buckmasters, their scoring system is, I believe, to be a bit more favorable versus Boone and Crockett sort of looking for the top 1% or maybe even less of deer. And in certain parts of the country, those deer they may never occur, right? Because you have to have ideal conditions and the right type of deer to get to that type of scoring. So anyway, everyone, thanks for joining me here, and hopefully you learned something about scoring deer. Thanks for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Later.